Code Labyrinth. The city was a skeleton of steel and glass, remnants of towers that once gleamed with digital promise. Now they were hollow, neon veins flickering weakly against the choking smog. Cale moved through the corridors of the derelict tech sector, aware that every step could trigger a surveillance ghost. Automated systems still functional, remnants of a civilization obsessed with control. In the silence, he could hear the faint hum of servers long dead, their memory banks flickering like dying stars. He was drawn to a building known among scavengers as the Labyrinth, a network of abandoned data nodes, corporate archives, and collapsed conduits that wove through the city like arteries. The legend said that anyone entering without a plan risked being trapped in loops of code, digital mazes left by programmers who had vanished during the Great Blackout. Cale had a plan, of course, but plans were fragile in this city. Reality itself bent under the weight of forgotten algorithms. Inside the first floor, the air was heavy with ozone and decay. Flickering lights reflected off shattered panels, illuminating corridors that twisted impossibly. The interface scanner in Cale's hand hummed, detecting residual code fragments in the walls, in cables, in the faint glow of forgotten holograms. Each step forward brought more anomalies, programs that seemed to rewrite themselves as he approached, doors that led to spaces he could not have imagined, staircases that curled back into themselves. The labyrinth was alive in a way that was both mechanical and organic. Cale paused at a terminal, its screen cracked, but traces of active processes visible beneath the glass. He traced a finger along the interface, feeling a spark of recognition. Here was a path through the tangle, a faint algorithmic map etched in fragmented code. He followed it, stepping lightly, eyes scanning for sudden traps, corrupted scripts that could fry a mind, rogue AI fragments that had survived the blackout and still sought to control intruders. Every corridor was a challenge, a test of intuition, logic, and endurance. The further he moved, the more the labyrinth seemed to react. Holographic walls shimmered, sometimes transparent, sometimes reflecting twisted versions of himself. He caught glimpses of people, ghosts of employees, programmers, security personnel, projected from old memory nodes, replaying moments from lives that were long gone. Cale could not interact with them, but their presence was unnerving, a reminder of what had been lost and what still lingered in digital shadows. At one junction, a cascade of light erupted from a terminal, forming a grid of shifting symbols across the walls. It pulsed like a heartbeat, and Cale understood that the code here was semi-sentient, reacting to intrusion. The grid was not malicious, but it demanded navigation, forcing him to consider each step carefully. One wrong move, and the path could vanish or redirect him into a recursive loop, a section of the labyrinth where time and logic were distorted. Cale took a deep breath, relying on instinct honed from years of surviving post-blackout ruins. He followed the rhythm of the light pulses, moving in harmony with the sequence, translating visual signals into steps. The corridors responded, walls stretching and contracting, a silent dialogue between human and code. His mind felt stretched, aware that every moment spent here added layers to his perception, reshaping how he understood cause and consequence in a world where code could outlive people. A sudden anomaly jolted him. A floor panel shifted beneath his feet, revealing a sublevel filled with cylindrical servers, each one pulsing with a faint internal glow. He realized these were memory cores, old corporate backups that might hold fragments of knowledge lost to the blackout. Approaching them, he felt the weight of possibility. Within these cores lay secrets, algorithms, perhaps even control over systems long thought dead. Cale understood instinctively. The labyrinth was both guardian and predator, offering opportunity and danger in equal measure. He activated his interface again, linking with the nearest core. Light spread across the room, illuminating every cable, every etched pattern in the metal. The echoes of the code were faintly audible, a digital hum that spoke in rhythms he almost recognized as language. Cale felt a pulse of anticipation and fear. The labyrinth was no longer just a maze. It was a crucible, a test of intellect, perception, and courage. Every decision, every step, carried weight. Miscalculation could trap him. leave him a ghost among the echoes of digital memory. Kale continued deeper into the sublevel, each corridor folding into the next. The labyrinth responded, testing him with obstacles, illusions, and anomalies that challenged not just his navigation skills, but his understanding of reality. Somewhere ahead, a central node waited, a convergence point of code, memory, and perhaps the last vestige of a corporate mind preserved after the blackout. Every pulse of light, every shimmer of holographic projection reminded him that the journey was far from over. The labyrinth was patient. It would test, confuse, and challenge until only the observant, the careful, and the persistent emerged. Kale was determined to be among them. Kale descended deeper into the sublevel, the hum of the memory cores growing louder, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat he could feel through the soles of his boots. The corridors twisted unpredictably, walls shifting subtly as if aware of his presence. Streams of code flickered across panels, forming patterns he almost recognized but could not fully grasp. Each anomaly tested him, each projection a subtle trap. Doors that disappeared when approached, floors that folded into themselves, fragments of holographic employees repeating endless loops. He paused at a junction where 3 corridors converged, each marked with faint glyphs that pulsed with light. One seemed straightforward, a narrow path lined with dim panels. The second twisted at impossible angles, a ribbon of metal and code that defied normal geometry. The third was filled with cascading light, symbols flowing across the walls in continuous streams, almost alive, and Kale felt a faint tug at his mind, a silent invitation or a warning. He could not tell. Trusting his instincts, he chose the cascading corridor, feeling the pulse of the artifact in his hand synchronize with the shifting symbols. As he moved forward, the light streams thickened, flowing over his vision, embedding fragments of code and memory directly into his mind. He had to concentrate, letting the sequence guide him step by step. One misread signal could disorient him, trap him in a recursive loop, or erase the fragile map he was constructing in his own memory. At the end of the corridor, Kale entered a chamber lined with vertical panels, each displaying fragmented corporate archives. The data was corrupted but tantalizing. Glimpses of project names, employee logs, encrypted contracts, and strange experimental protocols. He sensed that among these shards lay the remnants of decisions that had shaped the post-blackout world. The hidden rules that governed the remaining enclaves, the subtle manipulations that persisted even after the collapse of digital networks. Reaching for a panel, Kale felt the artifact resonate violently. Memories of the labyrinth's past users flashed before him. Programmers who had vanished, security personnel who had become echoes, administrators whose minds had been partially absorbed by the nodes. It was not just data he accessed. It was the trace of human presence embedded in the code itself. The labyrinth had preserved intention alongside information, and now it was testing his capacity to comprehend and navigate both. A sudden tremor ran through the floor, followed by a cascade of light from the panels. Symbols shifted rapidly, almost screaming at him in a language he could not fully decode. Kale stumbled, gripping the artifact, feeling a surge of fear and exhilaration. The labyrinth was alive, its defense mechanisms now fully engaged. Every movement was a negotiation. A step too fast could sever the fragile connection between his mind and the cascading code. A pause could trap him in loops of memory projections. Focusing, Kale allowed himself to flow with the rhythm of the chamber, letting the pulses of light and the hum of the artifact guide his actions. He traced sequences along the panels, identifying patterns in the chaos. The labyrinth revealed fragments of projects, encrypted schematics, and hidden nodes, keys to systems still functional, hidden deep beneath the ruins of the city. He realized that control over the remnants of the old networks was possible, but the cost of comprehension was high. Exhaustion, disorientation, and a creeping sense of losing self to the code. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed as he navigated the room, piecing together sequences and deciphering fragments. The labyrinth seemed to respond to his progress, walls contracting, panels shifting to present new challenges, new layers of complexity. Kale sensed a central node ahead, where the most crucial information might be concentrated. Reaching it would require navigating the labyrinth's most intricate defenses, but the potential rewards, the hidden algorithms and preserved corporate memory, promised insight and power. Cale's pulse quickened. He knew that the deeper he went, the higher the risk of entrapment or cognitive collapse. Yet he also understood that the labyrinth would not allow retreat without consequence. The code would lock fragments away, making them inaccessible to anyone else, or worse, corrupting the data entirely. There was no turning back now. Every step was deliberate, every decision a balance between survival and discovery. The chamber stretched onward, corridors branching into geometric impossibilities, panels shifting in response to his presence. Cale's eyes traced the lines of code, the flickering sequences of memory, the ghostly projections of those who had come before. The labyrinth waited, patient, inexorable, a test of intellect and resolve. And he moved forward, fully aware that the next junction could change everything, reveal the core of the labyrinth or trap him forever in its web of code. Cale entered the next chamber cautiously, the corridors behind him folding shut as if the labyrinth had no intention of letting him retreat. The panels here pulsed with greater intensity, sequences of code cascading like waterfalls, wrapping around him, embedding themselves in the periphery of his vision. Each symbol seemed purposeful, almost sentient, aware of his presence, and reacting to every flicker of thought. He felt the artifact in his hands vibrate, a subtle warning that the deeper he ventured, the more it would demand from him. Focus, endurance, and a fragile balance of cognition. The chamber's center revealed a platform, circular and raised slightly above the floor. On it lay a terminal that glowed faintly, untouched by decay. Cale approached, noting that the light emanated in pulses, synchronized with the hum of the memory cores he had passed. The terminal was active, a nexus of fragmented corporate memory. And as he connected his interface, sequences of schematics, project logs, and encoded experiments unfolded before him. The data was incomplete, jagged, yet the patterns were discernible. This was the foundation of systems still controlling enclaves across the city. As Cale traced through the files, he began to recognize names, programmers, administrators, executives, some he had encountered in projections earlier. They were not merely records. These were fingerprints of thought, decisions frozen in time, their intentions lingering in code. One file pulsed brighter than the rest, marked with a subtle glyph he did not recognize. Opening it revealed a network of directives, contingency plans, and hidden protocols designed to maintain control long after the blackout. The labyrinth had preserved not just memory, but leverage, the capacity to influence reality through the surviving nodes. The artifact thrummed violently in Cale's hands. He could feel the echoes of those who had once interacted with this node, their urgency, fear, and deliberate care. For a moment, he felt a connection, a shared consciousness spanning decades. Yet he understood the danger. The labyrinth was not neutral. It shaped perception, manipulating the observer to test judgment, resilience, and comprehension. One misstep could lock him in a recursive loop, lose him in overlapping memories, or imprint fragments of someone else's cognition into his own. A sudden shift caused the walls to pulse outward, forming a maze of light. Panels projected loops of code, each fragment more complex than the last. Cale's thoughts raced. He had to discern real directives from decoys, patterns from chaos. The labyrinth demanded engagement, forcing him to anticipate its reactions and counterbalance the constant pull of memory echoes. His mind ached from the pressure, the constant layering of intent and consequence. Yet he pressed on, tracing sequences, annotating patterns, carving a path through the flood of information. Midway through the chamber, a floor panel collapsed beneath him, revealing a hidden conduit lined with micronodes. The conduit pulsed with energy, each node glowing like a heartbeat. Cale realized this was a secondary layer of the labyrinth, a system within the system, more secretive, more dangerous. Memory fragments here were denser, overlapping, merging into near indistinguishable sequences. He could see glimpses of operations from long-dead administrators, traces of code manipulation, and subtle control mechanisms designed to shape human behavior in the remaining enclaves. Reaching toward a node, Kale felt a jolt of cognitive feedback. He staggered back, vision blurring as the artifact synchronized violently with the memory streams. The voices of past programmers whispered in overlapping layers, fragments of conversations, arguments, instructions, all pressing against his mind. He realized that the labyrinth was testing him, not just his skill, but his capacity to maintain identity under pressure. To falter now would mean assimilation. He could survive physically, but the integrity of his mind might not endure. Kale steadied himself, breathing deliberately, allowing the artifact to guide him through the cognitive storm. Step by step, he traced connections, isolated directives, and cataloged sequences that revealed the hidden architecture of corporate control. The labyrinth was yielding fragments of truth, yet each revelation carried weight. Knowledge of hidden protocols, surveillance networks, and encrypted strategies that could still shape lives outside the maze. The stakes were clear. Misuse could endanger entire enclaves, and the responsibility of knowing this rested entirely on him. At the far end of the chamber, a final panel shimmered differently. Its glow was steady, deliberate, almost inviting. Kale approached with caution. Here lay the core of the labyrinth's preserved memory, the nexus where past intent, control mechanisms, and corporate directives converged. He reached out, aware that engagement would produce irreversible consequences, an imprint on his consciousness, a burden of knowledge that could not be unlearned. The labyrinth waited. Its pulse matched his own, insistent, patient, inexorable. Kale took a measured step forward, ready to confront the heart of the system, knowing that whatever he discovered here would define not only his survival in the labyrinth, but also the balance of power in a city still shaped by the remnants of a dead network. Kale's hand hovered over the final panel, the glow steady, almost breathing, as if the labyrinth itself were aware of his presence. He drew a slow breath, feeling the hum of the artifact synchronize with the pulse of the chamber. The nexus of code before him was no longer just data. It was intention made tangible, a concentrated echo of the corporate will that had survived the blackout. Each fragment radiated influence, a delicate lattice of control designed to ripple outward into the fractured city. He activated the interface, letting the artifact translate the complex sequences into something his mind could grasp. The walls responded immediately, shifting into flowing corridors of light and information, cascading patterns that traced the architecture of hidden systems. Kale felt a pull, subtle but insistent, urging him to follow, to explore every node, to absorb every directive. The labyrinth was teaching, testing, offering power. But with every revelation came the weight of understanding. Knowledge here carried consequence, responsibility, and risk. For moments that stretched into hours, Kale traced sequences, isolated directives, and witnessed the interplay of past intentions shaping present reality. The labyrinth revealed fragments of influence. Surveillance algorithms still active, control protocols dormant but intact, and the echoes of administrators who had embedded their consciousness into the network's memory. He understood that these remnants were not neutral. They shaped perception, decision, and behavior, even after decades of silence. When the sequences finally stilled, Kale stepped back, hands trembling, mind full yet sharpened. The nexus remained alive, a constant, patient presence, but he had navigated it without losing himself. He had glimpsed the architecture of power, understood the subtle threads connecting past and present, and survived the cognitive strain of the labyrinth. The chamber pulsed faintly, a soft rhythm that matched his heartbeat, and for a moment, the city outside seemed less fragmented, more intelligible through the lens of hidden systems he now partially controlled. Kale moved toward the exit, aware that retreat would not be simple. The corridors shifted again, reacting to his departure, but the path was passable. The artifact hummed quietly, a companion now carrying the echoes of what he had learned. The labyrinth's test had ended, yet its influence remained. Knowledge was not neutral, and those who possessed it became part of the web themselves. Emerging into the ruins above, Kale paused. The city stretched before him, neon veins flickering weakly, shadows of towers rising against the polluted sky. He understood that the labyrinth had given him more than data. It had given him insight, responsibility, and a choice. How he would wield it and what consequences would follow were unknown. Every enclave, every survivor, every memory touched by the Nexus could shift based on his decisions. Kale stepped forward, artifact in hand, shadows of the labyrinth trailing silently behind him. The city waited, uncertain and fragile, and he walked into it fully aware that the labyrinth of code and of consequence was now part of him. The city breathed around him. So did the labyrinth.